Welcome to the 52 Love Podcast, your show for 52 love lessons in 52 weeks. Before we dive in, remember you can find the video version of this episode on YouTube along with the rest of the series. And now here's your host, Ms. Tonya Todd.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for episode 3 of the 52 Love Podcast. Today, I have an amazing friend with me, Dr. Wendy Wimmer. Will you please tell us about yourself and what you do?
Hi, I am a English creative writing literature professor and an author in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
What do you write?
I write all sorts of things. I probably made most of my cash flow in writing through writing nonfiction, but I write fiction and some essays, but primarily fiction. Mostly in the literary horror kind of comedy genre.
In the comedy genre, that's true. The stuff that you write, it feels serious, but there is definitely a level of humor to it.
Somebody described it as funny, scary, sad, which I think that's kind of like my perfect triangle: funny, scary, sad. So I'm in the middle of there.
I see that trifecta, definitely. So usually you have this 100 submissions in 100 days thing going on. Are you doing that this year?
I should. Oh, I didn't even think about it. We should start that in January 15th. Yeah, I call it the Century Club, and I challenge myself to do 100 submissions in 100 days. And the important thing is that isn't to get, acceptances, although that ends up happening. It's the idea that submissions are a numbers game. So in some cases, if you, you're not just like, spraying and praying, you're researching, and trying to find good markets to fit your work. But also just, I find that having a goal and kind of taking the idea of rejection out of it and going for the attempt is easier for me. Every time I've done it, I end up running out of things to submit before I get to my 100 because things have been accepted and then they get pulled out of the fray.
What a wonderful problem to have.
Right? Like it's kind of a good reason to fail at the Century Club is like you ran out of stuff to submit. And that has happened, but I even printed up, when I make this challenge to my friends, I have custom-made Olympic medals that I give out. If you make it to the 100, you get a medal that's engraved with your exceptional thing that you've done. So
you've given out a lot of those?
I've given out 2.
2, yeah.
Well, I don't give them to myself. But like I said, I've never actually won myself. So, but yeah, in fact, I encourage everybody, take the 100 subs in 100 days and challenge and become a member of the Century Club. And you'll find out that even if you don't, it's still a great thing. I can tell you, I have lost track of how many people have gotten publications by doing this challenge, including my friend Dylan Fisher, who not only did his novella win a prize here in the US, but then that publisher and get published, but then that publisher sent it to a prize in France and it won a best foreign story featuring, set in France award this year. I can't remember what the name is.
That's amazing.
Yeah, from a silly little, it doesn't matter. So, and I think when you take away that expectation, it doesn't matter, so why not? And take away the expectation of oh no, they're going to reject. So, and on some level, you're avoiding that pain, right? You're avoiding the idea of getting rejected. So that's what kind of makes submissions so miserable. But if you kind of just be like, it doesn't matter if it gets rejected, I'm just counting submissions, it helps. The motivation.
So what are some of the things that you submit? Like what types of things?
I submit short stories, primarily. However, I had a slew of poems that I wrote in undergrad. So I started submitting some of my undergrad poems. And then when I ran out of stuff last year to submit, because everything had been accepted and to get published once, I started looking for resubmits or reprints of people who were open for those. So I submitted some of those, and those also got accepted, some of them.
You said that wrong. You're supposed to say, when I ran out of things last year, because everything had been accepted.
Well,
and especially last year, that's amazing that you were still able to work toward this during such a crazy, chaotic year.
Yeah, it was a crazy, chaotic year. Last year at this time, before the pandemic hit, I was doing my comprehensive exams for the PhD. And so I was reading a million things. So basically, I couldn't really write my own stuff except for my dissertation. So that's why this will be a little bit of a harder. I'm definitely going to have to go back to the archives to find things to submit because I've just been not super productive.
So do you count querying literary agents? Does that count?
I feel like that should count. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's how I'm going to treat it this year because it is kind of a submission. Right.
It is. I think it should count, but I was just curious if, according to the rules of your challenge, do you count that?
I think anytime where you at an attempt, if you're making an attempt to put your work out there and chancing that rejection, I think that's a submission, right?
Okay.
You're submitting the process.
That's fair.
It's kind of, especially I'm now a former literary magazine editor, but as a literary magazine editor, it's kind of a controversial thing because a lot of editors get a lot of submissions. So just the idea that somebody's just arbitrarily trying to get more submissions out there is kind of painful. Fear that people are going to submit things that aren't even slightly appropriate, but that's not the point. The point is to, do the research, and that's why it's a challenge.
Right. Put yourself out there.
Anybody can send 100 emails. You have to make them unique, though.
Right. And no one said you don't polish your work before you send it. You just that should be implied, right? You definitely make sure that it's right for that particular publication, and you polish it as much as you can before you send it.
Well, and as having been a reader in a literary journal, I'm not sure if you ever saw these in the background, but we actually have labels that we apply to work that if it's not right for the publication, like they didn't read the publication ahead of time, or sometimes they're just not ready for publication too. So if it's just littered with spelling errors and errors in general, formatting stuff. One time we had somebody submit something that still had people's workshopping notes from their workshop on it.
I never saw anything like that.
Oh, I did. And then sometimes you get things that the font is like 22-point font, and you're like,
yeah, you didn't do your research. Yeah. You haven't been doing this long enough to know that that's just not the standard.
And I think people erroneously think that editors are editors, meaning they should edit your work. But if you're not going to do most of the work before you send it to me, I probably don't want to work with you. So it's also another party foul.
So what are you working on this year? What are your creative endeavors for 2021?
Well, I'm still finishing up my novel that I did for my creative dissertation. And I wrote a rom-com a few years ago that's been sitting. I call it the marination, where I just kind of get some distance away from it and then I come back to it. And so I have challenged, you're part of this challenge. I have challenged myself by, May 31st?
Yes.
I have to get the rom-com ready to send out to my group of writer friends. And if I don't, it will be painful. And if I do, Tonya, you're going to send me some macarons. So
that's right. That is an amazing challenge. And I think about it every day because of the project that I have.
And the pain?
Yeah. The pain, the punishment is not the fun kind. And it's punishment in the real sense of the word, It's
cringe. It's like, when I think about it, I cringe.
It hurts for real.
Yeah. And it's not even, it hurts you internally, but also like your empathy, it hurts your empathy. So I think those challenges are only when we need the big guns. I've made this kind of bet with friends a couple of times and it always works.
We are committed, right? Well, speaking of committed, how long have you been in your relationship?
Great question. I'd like to. I always hate answering this question because it reveals my age. But we started dating in 1990, and went. Let's see, we went like commitment, like hardcore one monogamy. Probably 6 months after that. So probably by 1991.
I like the way that sounds, hardcore monogamy. You make it sound so hot.
It was very scary for a teenager, especially one who had, an active social life.
I don't know. I think that's a good title for a book, don't you think?
Hardcore monogamy?
Yeah.
All right. So you have to write that book or start it. Otherwise, I'm going to steal it in a month.
It's on.
All right. At very least, it could be a chapter title or a future podcast.
Or an anthology series, and we can all contribute to it.
Oh, I like that. You just came up with a solution that everybody wins. That was good. Yeah, so we started dating in July of 1990. So it was 30 years of making out with this gentleman. This last July, we got married. We got engaged in 94. We didn't get married until 99. So we just celebrated our 21st wedding anniversary. But then,
wow, congratulations.
Yeah, but it was, we've been together for a while.
So when did you start calling him your gentleman caller?
I call him all sorts of things. I just go through phases.
Yeah, but that's my favorite one.
I started calling him the gentleman caller probably 3 years ago or 4 years ago, just because it made me laugh. Before that, I was calling him captain, and I still call him captain sometimes. That was probably for about 2. Before that, I was calling him Mr. Bucket.
Mr. what? I didn't hear you.
Mr. Bucket.
Oh, Mr. Bucket. That's not as hot as Captain.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And the background behind that is even less hot. There was a cartoon or a toy in the 90s called Mr. Bucket, and the toy was like he just like spat ball. He ran around spitting balls out of his mouth, encouraging children to pick up the balls and put them in the top of his head. He was a bucket.
That's so gross.
So gross. He just kept spitting these balls out, and he'd sing a little song, and the gentleman caller did a very good impression of that song. So he was called Mr. Bucket or Bucky. I still call him Bucket every once in a while.
So he has graduated to gentleman caller, which is the hottest of the 3 nicknames.
Is it? Oh, he was also Esteban for a while because his name is Steven. So Esteban. A lot of my friends who have known us for a long time still call him Esteban.
So how did it go when you tried this tip? Did you initiate it? Did you tell him what you were doing? Did you tell him it was for the podcast, or did you just try it? No, we just tried it. So I will tell you this. So this is a bit of a... I should probably mention this week's tip. It's just to hold hands. Yes. The one-on-one hand contact.
So, background, I grew up in a house that had very little contact, skin to skin, nothing, like no touch, no hug, nothing. And so I'm kind of a little bit like a bristly cat that way. In fact, my husband says he's very lucky that I'm very lucky that he's a cat person because otherwise, anybody else would be starved for touch. So I don't initiate touch. I have to think about it. So, and he is very, very, very handholdy. And so a lot of times I think about, oh, that's right, I have to hold his hand. And I look down and we're already holding hands because he's reached over and grabbed my hand at some point. So I feel like a faker because I really didn't get to, I did it a couple of times, but it was like normal because he loves it. So we're always holding hands. And then he even said at one point, he's like, do you think people hate us because we just randomly sit on the couch and watch TV holding hands? Like, we'll be watching British crime shows and we're holding hands.
That's not a reason to hate. That's a reason to adore you.
Well, but I think not everybody is like that's obnoxiously cute, right?
I think it's inspirational.
I will say this. I tried it while we were falling asleep one night, which is great. It's lovely to fall asleep holding hands, but there's a sleep thing as the person, you have to fall asleep before they do, because as some people do a hypnagogic jerk, and so if you're slightly falling asleep and then all of a sudden your partner is, like kind of flexing in your hand, it wakes you back up. So it's great except for that. If you can fall asleep fast, it's a great way to fall asleep holding hands.
Is one of you generally, well, I'm sure it's true that one of you is generally colder than the other. Which one are you?
I'm hot all the time.
You're the hot one?
Mm-hmm. I'm always hot. He's always cold. So he often is wearing 3 shirts at any given time. And I dress in layers constantly, like even right now, because I'm going to get hot at some point and throw it off.
Didn't know it was going to be that kind of show.
Yeah. So what does that have to do with holding hands?
Just the transfer of temperature between the 2 hands.
So this is something that my husband claims he can do, and maybe some of your watchers, your audience, can chime in on this. He can regulate the temperature of his hands to make his hands hotter if he's got cold hands. Like, he can do it by thinking about it.
That's interesting.
Have you ever heard of that?
No, not just by thought.
Yeah, he sits there and thinks about it, and I've even challenged him to do it, and he does it, and it's the weirdest thing.
That's a cool superpower.
It is, especially when you're holding hands, because you can be like, "Oh, your hands are cold," and they're like, "Give me a minute," and then he like,
let me take care of that for you.
Right, and then he stormed from X-Men's for like 2 seconds, and then he puts them, and his hands are warm again.
I appreciate that reference.
Yeah, you're welcome. I don't know what the connection was. I guess heat, but no, really, would be the guy who can do the cold, right? Who I don't remember.
Iceman and Firestorm.
Yeah, but he doesn't make it on fire. Like, I think of Firestorm as being like really.
No, there's a character, Firestar and Iceman. If they hold hands, one is hot, the other's cold, and so they have that exchange.
Ooh, neat. Does it create a tornado?
I don't think so.
I wonder meteorologically how that would work, because it would create fog, right? At least
it should. At the very least, steam, right? Because of the ice aspect of it.
Right. I don't know.
Now we'll have to conduct the scientific experiment in the comic book world.
Yeah, I'm not really sure about how the science of Iceman works, because is he taking the water molecules? Okay, this is in holding hands. That was a great segue though, when they hold hands. So So are you creating a tornado when you hold hands if you are the hot one and they are the cold hand person? I don't know.
We'll have to come up with this answer and do a follow-up to this, because now we all need to know.
I'm betting somebody in the audience is a X-Men fan and they've thought this through.
See, I love X-Men, but he's never been one that I've followed enough to learn how his power worked.
Yeah, me either. No, I'm really into I'm less into some of the weird. I'm more into the really early like Jubilee X-Men, like the early, like the
fireworks.
Yeah,
she's good at parties, right?
Right. Yeah, we should invite her to the podcast.
But is she in a committed relationship?
Oh, I don't know. Half of those comics are just like soap opera with superpowers, which is not a bad thing, really. No,
it's entertaining.
Yeah.
Well, to wrap this up, your stories are very entertaining. Where can people read them? How can they follow you on social media? And what can they do to support you?
Well, I'm all over social media. I'm at Twitter at Wendy Wimmer. I'm on Facebook at WM Wimmer. I'm on Instagram at Wendy_Wimmer. And I am on the internet at large at, you guessed it, www.wendywimmer.com. There's a publication link to my publications out there, and I sometimes update my blog, but I'm really bad about it. So if you want to reach out to me, I'm always available. I'm always answering on Twitter.
Well, thank you very much for being on the show. I'm very excited to have someone I just love so much being here with me and helping me get this started. And I'm glad you enjoyed the tip. I do want to say thank you, everyone, for watching. If you enjoyed the show, if you're enjoying the series, please subscribe, like, and share.